Welcome to One Word Stories. My name is Joanna Sell, and I'm really happy to welcome a very special guest of mine today, Claude-Hélène Mayer, who comes originally from Germany, not far from where I'm based, and has lived in Johannesburg for many years. She is the professor in organizational psychology, author of many books, and just recently she has published 3 books on a taboo theme, which is shame. I'm really looking forward to talking to you, Claude-Hélène, about shame, about storytelling activities and practices you apply to break with the shame. A very warm welcome.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I'm very happy to be here and that we are meeting again today after we have met several years ago. Thanks for the invite.
Yes, we met in Ireland, in Dublin, and it was a very interesting and moving meeting. I still remember I met you and also your son,
Yeah,
and you had a very powerful workshop.
yeah, thank you.
So, Claude-Hélène, share please with us what did actually bring you to the theme of shame?
Yeah, to the theme of shame, that was actually a friend of mine, Elisabeth van der Heijden. She one day said to me, you know what? We've always got these kind of shameful experience in our lives, and we hardly look at this topic because it's a taboo topic. And I said to her, "Oh my goodness, no, this is really not my topic. It's terrible. Why do you want us to look at this kind of topic?" And she said, yeah, you know what? Often we experience these kind of emotions, and especially the negative emotions, we do not talk about them. And don't you want to look at it and do some research, maybe in the workplace or even in the private spaces, how we can support people and ourselves as well to transform shame? And this is how I got to the topic. So it was actually not even my idea, but this friend of mine came to me and said, we must look at it. And in the beginning, I really went blank. I didn't know any kind of situation where I had experienced shame. And it took me quite some time to work with it and look for my own stories where I experienced shame.
Do you think it's kind of gender specific that there is any gender that experiences more shame than the other?
It depends a bit on the cultural context and surely also on the personality, but there is a lot of research on men and on women and on transgender and all of these different aspects, intersectionalities that are coming into the shame research. I believe that in the Western context, I think more research has been done by women on shame.
Mhm.
That might be really the case, and that when I look at the interview partners who've been part of our studies during the past years, women were usually more open to talking about shame than men, and often men take more time to talk about the topic. Often they say, oh, shame I have never experienced, you know, but maybe a kind of embarrassment, but not shame. And yes, somehow gender is connected to how we deal with emotions and also with shame. I believe that.
Yeah. Does feeling ashamed help us in certain situations?
Yes, I believe in some situation it really can be very helpful. And again, it depends on the cultural context. So always when I ask people about how do you feel when you feel ashamed, is it helpful for you or is it not helpful? Does it support you in anything? Most of the people say it's a very negative experience for them and they can't see really how it can help them. And I did once interviews from individuals from Central Africa, and they were the first ones who told me, no, shame is a very positive emotion because it shows us, and especially our children, what are the norms of our society, of our communities, what is allowed that you can do, what is not allowed. It shows you also the kind of boundaries we've got in our communities, what you can do and how you should behave towards yourself and towards others. And in this way, it can be helpful. However, when we are looking at it from a more Western point of view, maybe most of the people we've been talking to during the past 6 or 7 years in our research have said it's not helpful at all. And often we need to make an effort to look at the stories they tell us about shame, how they experienced them, how they felt about it, and how they worked with the shame to feel better and to see shame as a resource later on.
Yeah, Claude-Hélène, you have just emphasized in your answers many, many times that it's all about culture, that it depends also on the perception in different cultures. Was there any story from, I don't know, what kind of culture that surprised you that this situation was shameful for the person?
Um, yeah, we can see different stories here. One story that occurs across cultures and that really fascinated me is the story that people feel ashamed when they wake up and they had a dream that they went to work, for example, in their sleeping dress, or that they occurred somewhere naked. I'm not sure if you've heard this story or if you've even dreamt it yourself, but um, about it's all about body shame in this instance somehow, and yeah, coming into a new context where you are not dressed appropriately, for example. And this story I've heard across cultures about this dream of coming somewhere in a sleeping dress or naked without even having to be there in this kind of situation. So that is one that I saw across cultures. And then there was another dream, for example, that was told in one of our interviews, that a young man who actually was quite gifted in his university, and he was quite well known and famous, and people really liked him. And he had this reoccurring dream that he becomes the president of his nation.
Okay.
And when he became the president of his nation and people greeted him like that, he started to behave like a clown. And when he woke up, he felt very ashamed how he could put himself into this situation, being the president on the one hand, and also being ashamed that he transformed the figure of being a president into being a clown. So that was quite an outstanding one for me as well. And then there are many stories about for example, from Indonesian context about shame, how important it is to teach the children that they have to be ashamed when they meet somebody else, or at least show a kind of shame. Just to show respect to the elders or to the people who should be respected in their communities.
Yeah.
And then there are lots of stories about workplace shame, but also being ashamed about sexual orientation, for example, which is not accepted in societies or in certain kind of communities, and being ashamed about feeling love for someone you are not allowed to be in love with.
Mm-hmm. I remember I also attended a workshop where we were talking also about the language issue, that it's much, much easier to talk about the gender issue in English, where the vocabulary is really provided and we
Mm-hmm.
can name different phenomena, than in other languages, especially these languages that are used in the countries that are against LGBTQ. So, does it also play a certain role when people talk about shame, that you see that words are missing sometimes, that they struggle to name different things?
Yes, in a way, most of our interviews we conduct, or even the questionnaires, are in English, and we mostly work with English as our language. However, I've heard in interviews that people say they must think about the right word because they are not very sure about what is now shame, what is embarrassment, and that it could be actually expressed differently in their native languages. And I believe that our emotional concepts are often connected to the feelings we've got, and the expressions are very culture and language specific. So even the feelings that are connected to the expression of the word of the feeling and emotion might have an impact when they speak in the interviews or when we talk about shame. Because for me, it also makes a difference if I say the word in my first language, German, or if I say it in the English language, it makes an emotional difference inside of me.
Yes, definitely, definitely. I still remember when I was researching on Chopin. Yeah, it was really interesting to see that he actually was fluent in French and Polish, and his French friends said that he's a very, very um, big introvert, that he doesn't expose emotion, that all his emotions simply flow into his music. Whereas
Mhm.
his Polish friends, who knew him from the letters and knew how emotional language he uses, wouldn't even have this idea that he's covering emotions. So it's definitely also language specifics. It's also interesting, how we can distinguish it, that we talk about shame in different languages and we also experience different emotions.
Mhm. Yes, sure. And I remember your talk about Chopin. That was really a good one.
Yeah. It was really interesting, to research, but you are a researcher, so you know how much satisfaction it brings when you find something interesting. And yes, I have asked you what brought you to the theme. However, it would be also interesting to know what actually brought you to the intercultural field. That you cover with the theme shame, but not only.
Yes. Okay. To the intercultural field, that is actually a childhood story. I always felt when I grew up in the German context that I actually belonged onto the African continent. And it didn't have any kind of connection to my roots or anything, but it was just an idea that I had when I was very young, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And this is what brought me into the intercultural field, because I always felt I wanted to live in an African context. And then I studied intercultural didactics and cultural sciences and so on. And then my journey took me into psychology and management. And yeah, when I was, I think, 16 or 17, I traveled for the first time to East Africa. And then at a point in time, I just stayed on and I continued my journey on the continent. And
Wow.
this is, how I got into the intercultural field. And this is a topic that really accompanied me for the past, yeah, actually my whole life, I guess.
Yeah. So love for Africa.
Yeah, yeah.
So right now, when you are based in Johannesburg, and you are very familiar with the German context, can you say any differences, cultural differences, how people actually approach shame?
Yeah, it depends again a little bit on the context, but in general, I would say in both of the cultures, we do not speak a lot about shame. And also with whom you speak about shame might be different. I believe that in the German context, where we speak more directly than in African contexts, usually, we might address shame a little bit earlier in our personal relationships, and we might say it more directly and openly. Whilst in yeah, all of my conversations and contexts, and also private contexts in African contexts, people do not really name the word of shame, but they rather describe in a more indirect way what they experience. Often in African contexts and languages, we've got a more direct approach to feelings than in the German context, and we talk a little bit more about emotions, I would say, in daily life interactions than in the German contexts. But feelings are not necessarily mentioned directly, but rather described, and this makes a difference with regard to shame as well. And I believe often here I've heard men from specific cultural backgrounds speaking in the South African context about shame of being gay, that I haven't heard really in the German context. I think there the approach to, being gay is more open maybe and more accepted than in some communities of the South African culture. So this would be for me a difference in terms of frequency of mentioning shame with regard to this context. Otherwise, I think also here people are ashamed, for example, when their children do not perform at school,
Mhm.
or in a German context, I've often heard that people are ashamed because they don't speak a language properly, or they speak, for example, a second language with an accent like I do. Um, and this I've never heard in an African context, that people are ashamed of not speaking a language perfectly, for example, but rather being happy that they can somehow speak the language, you know.
Yeah. So the German perfectionism.
A little bit is coming in here.
Yeah. Yeah, so I can confirm it, to be honest, because it happened to me many, many times that people, as you say, were ashamed that they spoke with an accent or that they weren't fluent in a certain language. And there are, very, very difficult languages, just like, I don't know, my mother tongue, Polish or Chinese, yeah, that nobody even expects that, yeah, they would be fluent in it. Yeah, so it's, yes, it's culturally driven, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I'm thinking of shame, it's also something that comes to my head when watching, maybe not watching, but reading some posts on social media, that a kind of taboo theme got broken because so many people lost their jobs, and
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
posted also on social media that they are searching for a job, or they are right now in this transition moment. I still remember a pilot who just kept posting what kind of jobs he was performing, and still dreaming of being a pilot again. And I guess there are also currently this taboo themes, such as being ashamed of losing the job, that got broken, that
Mhm.
don't exist any longer, because so many people are in this boat, so to say. Do you have a similar observation? How do you
Yes.
perceive it?
It is actually great that you're talking about this topic, because I came across it many, many times. A lot of people have lost their jobs, and for many of them, especially for high achievers, it's very shameful. As you say, pilots, for example, or people in business organizations that have closed down. We've seen this a lot, and I'm also doing therapy and a lot of consultancy in work places and contexts. And I worked with a person who had lost his job due to the situation of COVID-19, and a high achiever, and who really did not even dare to go to his fitness club anymore, because he was so ashamed of having to justify why he lost his job now, why he can't find another one, why he didn't move maybe already to a different country where the situation could be better. It was very, very difficult. And we worked a lot about and with this topic of shame and losing the job. And I believe that here's also a gender component. Within the South African context, a lot of male individuals have lost their jobs. And we could see this, and for men, especially in this cultural context here, and maybe also in the German cultural context, where it's expected that you are the breadwinner still, I mean, to a certain degree, it is very difficult if you lose your job. We've seen this as well, and it needs to be somehow transformed, that people bounce back into life and see and be able to look for different options. But I've also seen surely women, I mean, who have had problems finding new positions in this time, and especially mothers who maybe are single mothers. Within the South African context, we see that more women are actually hit losing their jobs and becoming unemployed. Yeah, more women than men. However, they might not feel that threatened by the situation, or not express this shame so often here.
Hmm. Yeah. Yes,
Mm,
COVID has impacted all of us a lot. And,
yeah.
it's also one of these questions I keep asking all my guests. What was actually one word and one story behind that was supportive in this tough time for you?
Yeah, supportive be beyond shame and transforming shame was the word of love for me, because we have seen in all of our research that people struggle to transform shame. And one of the words that always come up within this context to try and use shame as a resource is the word of love, because love is a concept that we can see again on a global level. People have very different meanings and what it means to them to feel love. But what we can see is that a lot of people see love as a universal force to transform negative emotions, to connect to other people, to get support from other people, to unify across differences. And this word really, in my research, but also for me personally, really made a difference, because it is bringing a kind of positive view to negative emotions and has got a transformative force.
What was the moment when love was a game changer?
The game changer. I think, let's say, I think it's been across my life quite important. I mean, to coming from my family of origin up to today. However, to have a more conscious approach maybe to love, and what it really means to me, um, came maybe a few years ago when I looked deeper into transformative forces and what can really help to deal with negative emotions. But I had a key situation just a few weeks ago, because my daughter got really sick, and she had a heart failure and she had to go to a hospital in Europe. And I was sitting here in South Africa and I couldn't travel because of COVID. And it was really a very painful time for her and for me as well, because I couldn't be with her. And I tried to transform the suffering and pain through a universal, approach to love, and yeah, bringing this more into my life. And also, when friends came and supported me and were just there for me, I experienced a kind of love and support by them, a kind of universal support. And this is what I claim to be love, and a loving relationship that really helped to transform the suffering and pain, not only related to shame, but also to personal suffering, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. So the transformational power of love. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I believe that's really important for all of us. And also when we are looking at the world and our leadership in the world, and also the organizations which struggle at the moment, if we bring in the universal concept of love a bit more, of connection and supporting each other, it can really help in these kind of difficult times of COVID-19 as well.
However, my first impression is that, people still kind of stick to these policies of not talking about emotions.
Yeah, I think we don't really often talk about them, but sometimes we just need to show them, like giving someone a hug or holding hands, or I don't know, giving a smile. And all of these expressions might also be expressions of love. Although we often need stories of love or narrations of love or mentioning these words, sometimes they come through the nonverbal actions as well. And this can maybe also be helpful.
Yes, definitely. Yes. Still, I remember a meeting where we were sitting, I think, in a group of seven from different countries, and one woman burst in tears. And my very first reaction was really to approach her and to give her a hug, and
Mhm.
not to talk, not to say anything, just to hug her, to communicate, I'm here for you. And then the group dynamics was just the opposite, just let her express her emotions and don't do anything. And it
Mhm.
was such a high, dense, emotional, how to call it, emotional moment, that I didn't dare to approach her to give her a hug. This is what I mean
Mm.
also with, with this culture of, let's say, policy of not showing emotions, that even
Mm.
if we
Mm.
feel like it should be a proper behavior, then we, or not we, but I personally
Mm.
didn't do it.
Mm. Yeah, I think we often experience these kind of situations where we have to make the decision, do we show our being close to someone, or do we hold back and wait for the expression of the other person first? And it is true, it also depends maybe a little bit about the motivation behind it. Why do we do it, and how to behave the best? And maybe the best approach would be, I don't know, but it surely depends on the context, but to ask the person, how can I support you best, if she can still speak whilst, bursting out in tears, I don't know. But from a therapeutic point of view, we would probably ask the client, I mean, how could I help you best now in this situation? But on a personal note, I think, sometimes if we feel we need to hug someone, we need to hug someone.
Mm, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
It's all about love. And I really love your background, by the way. Love is love.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
At the moment, we just published, Elisabeth van der Heijden and I just published an international handbook on love. Really, it's a huge book with the 1,300 pages from different cultural points of view, and in the workplace and in private spaces and so on. And that was really a big project. So my next project is not so much on love, but more on psychobiographies, again, looking at the life of different extraordinary individuals from different psychological perspectives. But one contribution might also look at love and faith, actually, and how it is transformed of an individual throughout the lifetime.
Hmm. Very interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting. And still, you've got this talent to touch this taboo themes, you know, because again, faith is still such a taboo theme in many contexts, isn't it?
No, it's true, especially in the German context, I guess. I'm not sure about the Polish one, but in the South African context, especially now during COVID-19, because nobody really knew what to do and how to behave and how to react and how to deal with all of these, difficult situation and challenges of death all around. A lot of people, I just hear them saying, we have to believe in, God or whatever they believe in, or a higher power. Let's rather say a higher power. But a lot of people here are Christians, so they talk about God. But I would say a higher power to really manage the situation, and to trust that it will one day be better, because we don't know what actually to do.
Hmm.
So yes, it's a taboo topic in many cultures, and I would say in the South African context, it is very comforting,
Yeah.
because sometimes things go beyond of what we can do as individuals. They go beyond vaccinations, and they go beyond dealing with death experiences. And sometimes this is the force that can help us, and maybe it's just another word for love.
Yeah, yeah. I'm really grateful for your comment because actually, just recently, I also had a client from South Africa, and he is going to relocate to northern Germany. And he himself, he is Muslim, however, of the Indian origin. Yeah. So we had a very, very interesting discussion how he is perceived in the
Mhm.
German speaking context, because obviously he has got plenty of virtual meetings with his new team right now. And he says, people tend to forget or not even to think of it that I come from South Africa, nevertheless, I'm a Muslim. And
Mhm.
it was the moment when I said, oh, I'm really, really sorry. I didn't send you any wishes for, Eid Mubarak, so to
Mm.
break the Ramadan, because
Mm.
I haven't even thought of it. You are right. Yeah.
Mm. Mm.
And then he said, yes, but faith, and this is exactly the point, is such a taboo theme, yeah, in the German
Mm.
context. And I said, yes, nevertheless, it's so much up to us how we behave and what we communicate, what is important to us, that people at one point would really, just feel like, oh, I would really like to show respect, or just to show that I remember of your celebration. And for this reason, they would send you also the wishes. Yeah. Uh,
Mm.
so this is also something that we tend to forget in the intercultural context, that faith is so meaningful to many people, and just wishes for, I don't know, Eid Mubarak, or I don't know, whatever of other celebrations are very meaningful. So these wishes could really be also extremely important for them.
No, I believe so too. I really agree with you. And yeah, I think we still need to create a little bit more awareness about this topic as well. And how we develop with regard to our faith is probably also quite important across our lifetimes. And I think in many of the faith development theories from a psychological perspective, at the end, we would like to see, or at the end of life, or after we have transcended a bit, an integrative approach to faith, that we can really see the universal aspect of it and how it impacts very well on our mental health and well-being. And I believe this is very important, that we, always become more conscious and more aware of faith in our life and what it means to us, not only in the category of a kind of religion or religious belief or faith, but in general, the universal belief that we carry around all of our life and we try to transcend for the better.
Yeah, yeah. So we have covered lots of taboo themes. Shame, love, yes. Maybe it's not a taboo theme. However, I would say that, people don't take this word into mouth so often, just because we know what happens when we use words way too frequently. We hijack them, yeah. And
Yeah.
maybe this is also the reason. So it's not really a taboo theme, it's just that, yes, we are pretty conscious about using the word love. But also faith, especially in the intercultural context, it's more tied to the conflict than to the conflict resolution, which
Mm.
should be changed. Yeah.
Yeah, in terms of faith, I completely agree. And I think with regard to love, often when I say, I do research on love in workplaces, people think about romantic love, and they do not necessarily think about, love as a general, more general emotion. In Western contexts, it's often bound to romantic love, and it is not necessarily. We can also often speak about compassionate love,
Yeah.
but maybe it is also bound to the cultural background again, if we speak about it, and if we rather speak about negative experience or emotions than positive ones. And this might be also a cultural implication that comes into play.
So, Claude-Hélène, how do you work with stories so that people are invited to share the positive stories and not only the stories of painful experiences?
Yes, often, for example, when I work in organizations, I ask them for their, narrations on the organization, on the employees, on the leadership. And first of all, I ask openly most of the time, and then I see what kind of stories are coming up. Is it rather the positive or the negative, or how are they judged and valued? These kind of stories. And in the South African context, often you first get very positive stories until you've reached a certain point where people have gained trust, and then they come up with a more difficult experiences or challenges. And in other cultures, it might be different, and people say first what is so negative about where they are and what they experience. And it really takes a kind of transformation to get into the positive. So if I expect a negative story first, but I rather want to work with a positive, I change the mindset by asking my question differently. And I ask, please look at the positive aspects you've experienced throughout your 10 years in the organization and mention these ones. And this is what we often do in positive psychology. So we work with that. Or if they bring in negative stories, we highlight the positive aspects or reframe the stories for them. sometimes, to look at the positive. But I know you've worked with that far more than I have. So you will probably use a similar approach or one that goes beyond that.
Yes, yes, definitely. My experience is just that when I tell the people, could you share a story, that they might feel kind of overwhelmed. Yeah, that there are people who either say, "Oh, I have no story to say to tell,"
Mm,
or "I have so many stories what to start with." So actually, it's also a little bit about framing. That many times we simply ask the people, "Could you share a moment, or could you take me to the moment when something happened?" Yeah.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
this,
no, that is true. Yeah, to anchor the story somehow in a specific context. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. So, Claude, Hélène, thank you very much for sharing how you work with stories, for sharing also the stories on shame, on love, on faith. This is also something very important in the organizational context, that this taboo themes
Mm, mm,
stop being taboo themes, and we can create spaces that are much more human in the 21st century.
yeah. Thank you very much for the invite again. It was really nice to talk to you, and I hope we will meet soon again.
Yeah, thank you.